Most people believe they see themselves clearly. They assume their self-image is something they consciously built through choices, achievements, and personal reflections. But the truth is far more unsettling. Long before you had the ability to understand who you were, a version of you was already being shaped inside your mind. Not by intention, but by exposure. Not by truth, but by repetition. This invisible self-image wasn't created through logic. It was assembled through the emotional atmosphere you lived in. Every look of approval, every moment of disconnection, every tone of voice, every sigh of disappointment, all of it became data. And your subconscious collected that data with one mission: define who you must become to feel safe. You learned whether your needs were welcome or inconvenient. You learned whether your emotions brought closeness or distance. You learned whether mistakes were allowed or punished. You learned whether your presence was valued, ignored, or criticized. And slowly, silently, a self-image emerged. Not the real you, not the you that exists beneath the surface, but the version your environment taught you to be. If love felt conditional, you learned to earn your right to exist. If affection disappeared when you expressed emotion, you learned to suppress your inner world. If your successes went unnoticed, you learned that nothing you did was ever enough. If conflict brought chaos, you learned to stay small to keep the peace. This is how a false self-image is formed, a collection of adaptive behaviors mistaken for identity. And because the subconscious is loyal, painfully loyal, it protects this internal image as if your survival depends on it. Even when it limits you, even when life offers more than your old self-image believes you deserve. The most striking part is this: you don't see the image. You only see its consequences, the opportunities you don't pursue, the relationships you tolerate, the goals you shrink to match your place, the compliments you reject because they don't feel true, the dreams you postpone because they feel too big for someone like you. You think you're making rational choices, but in reality, your invisible self-image is making most of them for you. Before you can change your life, you must confront the version of you that your mind created long before you had a choice. Only then will you understand why your potential feels foreign, and why the life you want still feels like it belongs to someone else. You may believe that your choices come from logic, intention, or willpower, but the invisible self-image formed in your early years doesn't simply sit in the background. It actively filters your reality. It decides what you notice and ignore, what you pursue and avoid, what feels possible and what feels out of reach. It quietly shapes every aspect of your life, not by force, but by familiarity. Your self-image acts like an internal thermostat. No matter how much your external circumstances change, you eventually return to the level of identity you unconsciously believe you deserve. If your self-image is set low, then peace feels suspicious, success feels unsafe, love feels overwhelming, and opportunities feel undeserved. And without even realizing it, you self-regulate downward, back into the emotional temperature that matches your internal narrative. People call this self-sabotage, but it's not sabotage, it's maintenance. Your mind is maintaining the version of you it believes is safest. If you were taught to be quiet, you'll shrink your voice. If you were taught your needs were too much, you'll apologize for existing. If you were taught strength means never asking for help, you'll drown silently. If you were taught love must be earned, you'll chase people who never fully choose you. Not because you want to, but because your self-image expects you to. the invisible self-image influences everything. You are drawn to people who affirm the version of you your mind already believes. If your self-image is small, you choose partners who reinforce that smallness. If you secretly believe you're unworthy, you feel uncomfortable with someone who treats you well, and strangely comforted by those who don't. Your dreams will only grow as large as the self-image that holds them. If deep down you believe, "I'm not capable," then every opportunity becomes a threat. Not because you lack ability, but because the dream is bigger than the identity that carries it. You don't react to events. You react to what those events mean to your self-image. A compliment threatens someone who doesn't believe good things about themselves. Constructive feedback destroys a person who believes they're always wrong. Neutral situations become emotional storms because your identity hijacks the interpretation. The invisible self-image creates psychological ceilings. Whenever you get too close to a breakthrough, discomfort rises. You may feel anxious, tired, unmotivated, overwhelmed, or suddenly busy. These aren't weaknesses. They are identity alarms. Your mind is trying to pull you back into the version of you it understands. The tragedy is this: you think you're choosing your life, but most of the time you are choosing your identity over and over again. And unless that identity changes, nothing else can. To break free, you must see what the self-image has been protecting and what it has been preventing you from becoming. At some point in your life, long before you had language to describe it, you learned that certain parts of you were unsafe to express. A feeling was ignored. A need was dismissed. A moment of vulnerability was punished. And without even realizing it, you began to build emotional armor, not out of strength, but out of necessity. Piece by piece, you covered the most sensitive parts of who you were, believing it was the only way to stay protected. But here's the paradox. The armor that once kept you safe now keeps you distant from yourself. Every emotional wound, even the ones you don't consciously remember, created a protective strategy. You learned to overthink so you wouldn't feel. You learned to detach so you wouldn't be disappointed. You learned to be strong so you wouldn't be abandoned. You learned to minimize your needs so you wouldn't be a burden. What you call personality is often just protection. And the tragedy is that the world praises these defenses. Being independent is admired. Being rational is respected. Being emotionally controlled is rewarded. But beneath these achievements, there is often a quiet exhaustion, the feeling of living a life that never truly touches you. This is how emotional armor shapes reality. When someone tries to get emotionally close, your mind anticipates danger, not because the person is harmful, but because closeness once cost you something. So you distance yourself subtly, well, not by rejection, but by distraction, busyness, or emotional neutrality. When life becomes peaceful, the armor vibrates with discomfort. Calm feels suspicious, kindness feels unfamiliar, stability feels like a setup. The wound expects chaos, so when chaos doesn't appear, you recreate it, not consciously but instinctively. A delayed response feels like abandonment. A small mistake feels like failure. A neutral tone feels like disappointment. You're not responding to the present. You're responding to the wound inside you that was never acknowledged. You think you're fine, focused, or in control. But numbness isn't calm. It's shut down. You've learned to silence your internal world so effectively that you no longer recognize your own emotional pulse. The emotional armor that once protected you has become a prison. Not because it is rigid, but because you've lived inside it for so long that you forgot it isn't you. But here's the turning point. Your wounds do not want to punish you. They want to be witnessed. They don't want to dominate your life. They want to be released. They don't want to define your identity. They want to be integrated. A wound loses power the moment it is seen with honesty instead of shame. This part of the journey is not about removing the armor violently. It is about understanding why it was built and gently teaching the body that it is no longer necessary. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when something inside you shifts. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or clarity or certainty. It arrives as a whisper, a question, a subtle recognition that the voice you have been obeying your entire life was never truly yours. This moment is the beginning of the end for the emotional parasite that has shaped your reality for decades. Because awareness is not passive. Awareness is disruption. It interrupts automatic behavior, weakens old narratives, and exposes the emotional intruder that once operated in the dark. What was invisible becomes undeniable, and what was powerful becomes fragile. You begin noticing the small things first, the hesitation before answering a simple question, the tension in your chest when someone offers kindness, the instinct to apologize for taking up space, the reflex to shrink, even when no one is watching. These micro moments reveal something essential. Your system was never protecting you. It was protecting the fear that lives inside you. When this truth is finally seen, not intellectually, but viscerally, something profound happens. You stop fighting yourself. Instead of pushing, forcing, or battling your inner life, you begin observing it. You notice the internal alarms, the emotional echoes, the old memories rising like ghosts. And rather than responding automatically, you pause. That pause is not small. That pause is liberation. Because in that pause, you are no longer the child who learned to fear. You are no longer the adult who performs an identity built on survival. You become the witness, the one who sees the pattern instead of becoming it. Every time you observe instead of obey, the parasite weakens. Every time you choose presence over reaction, its grip loosens. Every time you question the old truth, a new truth emerges. This is the part most people misunderstand. You don't defeat the emotional parasite by force. You dissolve it by starving it. Its survival depends on repetition. Its strength depends on your unconscious compliance. Its existence depends on darkness. But you are bringing light. Little by little, the world inside you rearranges itself. You begin speaking differently, breathing differently, making choices that once felt forbidden. You tolerate more peace. You accept more kindness. You expand into spaces you once believed you didn't deserve. And then, something unexpected happens. You meet the version of yourself that was buried beneath fear. Not a new you, but the real you. The one who existed before the parasite began feeding on your emotional wounds. That version is calm, but not passive, clear but not rigid, soft but not weak, capable in ways you never imagined, not because you learned something new, but because you finally unlearned what was false. So here's your invitation. If this video exposed something inside you, a fear, a memory, a pattern you've been carrying for years, write in the comments, I am ready to stop feeding the fear. Because naming the transformation is the first conscious act of reclaiming your inner world. And this journey you're on, it's not about becoming someone else. It's about returning to who you were before the fear took over. This is the beginning of your rebirth.